All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Elections Weekly. I'm your host, Eric Cunningham, as usual. We have our usual panel here, Joe Szymanski and Dylan Brown. We got some interesting political news at the last minute and throughout the week. So we're going to go ahead and start with the big news, which is that Trump has announced his endorsement in Ohio. This has been tipped off by reporters earlier in the week that he was going to endorse J.D. Vance for Senate in Ohio in the Republican primary. He just officially did that minutes before we started our podcast. So we'll go ahead and go into the roundtable here. Obviously, polling has been kind of scarce since this word had come out. There's been one poll. It's been from Trafalgar. Says that even with the endorsement for Vance, that Mandel was still ahead. Other polls have pretty consistently had Vance in third or fourth place. So I'll go ahead and throw it to Joe here. When is this primary? Do we expect an impact here? And what are we kind of looking at? It seems to me like Ohio is one of those states where a Trump endorsement we have some of the biggest weight, as opposed to some other states.
Yeah, so we're officially we're almost 2 weeks now out from Ohio at this point. The primary date is May the 3rd, which is only 2 weeks out from this upcoming Tuesday. So we're really into the gutter right now on Ohio and Indiana. We will have a live show. Me, Eric, and Kraz Greinitz, and Dylan, if he so wants to, of course, is also invited to on May 3rd if he wants to come on. Okay. We'll be starting on, of course, at poll closing time in Ohio, which I believe is 8 o'clock. I believe Eastern time. So we'll be starting from 8 o'clock Eastern time, May 3rd. We'll have probably at least a 3-person to 4-person panel that night, right here live on Elections Daily. To get to the actual question, though, this is an endorsement that is going to matter, especially in Eastern Ohio. Eastern Ohio is where not a lot of these candidates come from. They don't have necessarily a lot of influence there, but Donald Trump is kind of the man out there in Eastern Ohio. He's a liked guy again. He's going to be very good. In my personal opinion, I actually would rather have had Vance than Mandel. Mandel said a lot more controversial content. He is not a necessarily maybe the worst individual we'll have, though arguably I know Eric has economic complaints about him. I think there are questions about Vance's positions on economics in the Republican Party, manifesto. But however, I don't think this is as doom as an endorsement as I think it would have been for Mandel. Mandel is someone who would have angered a lot more people, in my opinion. He's somewhere who would have brought out, I think, a lot more of the angry people on social media. Vance will do some of that, but I don't think he will do it to the level that Mandel would do. Tim Ryan, I think his only chance was a Mandel endorsement and then Mandel winning the primary. I think at this point, especially with the only poll that we've seen in terms of Trafalgar, who arguably we do have a questionable poll from them today in the Pennsylvania Senate primary regarding one candidate. So take maybe, obviously with primary polling, it's always kind of a grain of salt type thing with primary polling. You can never really tell who's going to turn out and what's going to happen there. But I really do think, that, Vance, I think for someone who's been kind of languishing in third and fourth recently, this could be the type of boost that he needs, I think, to potentially pull it out in 2.5 weeks' time.
So, question about that Ohio primary poll, because I didn't read it the same way. Was that not a pre-Trump endorsement poll with a second question about would you be more likely to back X candidate if they were supported by Trump? Because I don't think they polled the candidates after the Trump endorsement.
Let me look at it real quick, because the exact poll right now, so looking at the Trafalgar poll, if Republican primary were held today, 28-23. So I think you're probably right there.
And then 50% were more likely, I believe.
Yeah, but they didn't have an after poll, so they didn't have an after Trump endorsement poll.
Okay, so we don't really know if Mandel would be, or if Vance would still be languishing in second with the Trump endorsement. I suspect he would not.
It's not even second. Like the previous two polls. So there's a Remington poll that came out on April 11 to April 12, which is a Mandel internal, which did show an increase for Vance if there's an endorsement, but not a lead. And this would also be that as well. And then the More Information Group poll, which was from the Timken campaign, showed Gibbons in the lead with Vance in third. There was a Fabrizio poll early in March that supported Vance that had him tied. But outside of those, Vance polls, he's kind of been stuck in a third. This is a 5-person race, really. He's been stuck in third or fourth. I'm doing better certainly than someone like
Matt Dolan.
Matt Dolan in particular, or Jane Timken. Not to discount the Dolan campaign, he's apparently doing better than expected in the polling numbers. But just looking at it from that, I really don't know. Kind of what we can get for. I want to see an actual reputable poll. Trafalgar is usually pretty good in Republican primaries, but obviously you want some better polls than Trafalgar. It's kind of like the data for progress logic. They're usually decent in Democratic primaries, but you prefer someone a little bit, a better pollster, one with a better reputation,
and someone who might probably isn't working for one of the candidates. There's always.
Sorry, to be fair to Data for Progress, in Democratic primaries, their polls were startlingly accurate. If anything, the polls underestimated the candidates you would think they support.
The problem was general. And then Trafalgar's actually got a pretty decent track record in Republican primaries. Like, it's not bad. I think it's actually pretty good. I need to look at the exact details. But as far as I can tell, the reputation of Trafalgar in Republican primaries is pretty solid overall.
So I came back from a walk about 20 minutes ago, and I opened up our group chat, and I saw Eric saying that Trump endorsed a Marxist. And I thought, whoa, Trump endorsed Morgan Harper? That's insane. JD.
Yeah, I will get too much into policy details, but what I can say is that Ohio Republicans are not happy about this endorsement from what I've seen. Most of the Ohio Republican Party, they don't want someone endorsing a never Trumper. That's just what Vance was in 2016. I don't have an issue with that. I was a never Trumper in 2016. I didn't vote for him. I voted for Evan McMullen back then, which is something I'll say in public, but something I really want to forget I did. I would have much rather voted for someone other than Evan McMullen.
Gary Johnson existed.
But it's the same logic, right? So they're upset about that. Also, he is genuinely way out of whack with the Republican mainstream on economics. And a lot of Ohio Republicans in the more traditional business wing, which is probably the majority of the party still, based out of, I've mentioned this before, Columbus, Cincinnati, Cleveland. Those are the 3 cities and 3 suburbs you see the Republican base, this sort of business-oriented base come out of, where you get your Rob Portmans, your Mike DeWines, who have basically dominated the state of Ohio in politics since the last 2 or 3 decades. Democrats have had a very, very poor time running in Ohio and competing in Ohio. And it's not because of gerrymandering. I mean, part of it, you could say part of it is, but it's because Republicans are genuinely very, very strong in Ohio because of these business-oriented types. We have someone like Vance who's running on some weird messaging like taxing corporations who are woke, or a bunch of other things that just are really, really weird.
He had me in the first half of that sentence.
Yeah. Dylan's he's intrigued, and then they're woke. That's the how do we determine woke? Yeah, that's the question, right? But
I mean, Mo Brooks is woke, apparently.
Yeah. So in terms of endorsements, this is really there's a lot of people in Trump's circle have been pushing for not only Vance but also Blake Masters in Arizona. This is Peter Thiel and his large amount of money going into these races to support these candidates.
He is so going to endorse Blake Masters. I can't believe I didn't say that sooner.
It seems like he's having more difficulty. The Masters thing is a little bit more difficulty. I think if he was going to endorse Blake Masters, he would have done so sooner. And especially because he does not like Mark Vernovich at all. So the fact that he's not endorsed anyone there yet, when he seems to have liked everyone in Ohio for the most part. He endorsed Jane Timken when she was running as a, for party office in Ohio. He's spoken pretty favorably, I think, about every single Republican in this primary. In Arizona, the only thing he's really contributed there is that he likes Kerry Lake and that he does not like Mark Vernovich. As far as contributions go, that's not really a whole lot. But I'm sorry.
No, I think all of Trump's endorsements over the last week are really funny. Look, Democrats are going to have a bad year. That's inevitable at this point. Vance, if he's the nominee, which I suspect at this point he will be, Mandel and Timken internals don't give me a whole lot of confidence. A Trafalgar poll does. it gives me more confidence, because even though they seem to make numbers up, for some reason they're still accurate.
It's really weird. I think they're just genuinely in pulse with a lot of Republican primary voters, which people tend to think the worst of Republican primary voters, but in reality, a lot of usually they're not generally electing these crazy people in as many primaries as you'd suspect. Just look at the Mo Brooks campaign. Obviously, Roy Moore won that first primary, but one of the alternatives is Mo Brooks. He's a more standard nutcase candidate, and he's gotten nowhere in 2 runs with a Trump endorsement.
I see Mo Brooks, but I raise you Josh Mandel,
Sure.
who by all accounts was the front runner until this week. Sorry, Joe, but I think Givementum has died.
Well, what can you do?
But
this is a fascinating tale of the last week now, with both the endorsements of Dr. Oz and JD Vance, that Trump has gone against kind of what this has kind of been the risk for Trump.
I'm sorry.
This cycle is that with the way he's been endorsing candidates, they may win, but number one, they might not win with a majority of the electorate like they normally have, especially in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, where we have big primary fields.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, he's upsetting people. He's upsetting people who are, maybe like Trump, who voted for him, but he is endorsing candidates who they don't have high respect for. This is happening in Pennsylvania. I've heard the same thing in Pennsylvania from Pennsylvania Republicans that you've heard from people in Ohio, connections to the Ohio Republican base that we've seen the reaction to. People who are more connected to people like Carlos Sands and Dave McCormick, and even more establishment governor candidates, even people who work for people like Lou Barletta and Bill McSwain, of course, no surprise. They're people who did vote for Trump and did like him as a candidate, is are not very happy with the way Trump has decided to endorse in these key races. And I don't think 2024 being necessarily totally solidified for him if he decides to run right now at this point, it's a risk for him, which is why I'm surprised, I think, to see him endorsing in these close races out of power without having the presidency behind him.
I have a theory about that, actually. I think he's specifically endorsing these candidates because they upset people, not as a way not to upset people. But how many articles have we seen about, is Trump's influence in the Republican Party waning? That sort of thing. I think he's endorsing these kind of nutball candidates. This might not be his thinking, but he's listening to somebody. So I think whoever's advising him thinks, what better way to show that Trump still has power in the party than by taking generally crazy outside the box candidates like Mandel and Dr. Oz, and to a lesser extent Herschel Walker, because he seems to have gotten the establishment behind him, and getting them across the finish line.
Yeah, Walker isn't really talking about Trump at all, but he also doesn't have a primary, to be fair. He's fair.
He did have one, though.
Yeah.
Who was the ag commissioner?
Gary Black. Yeah, but Gary Black has had no money, and that's kind of a fault there. What I would say is I don't disagree with you, but I also think this has been a pattern going back a while. I don't think he talked with Alabama Republicans at all when he endorsed Mo Brooks. I don't think he talked. He definitely didn't talk with North Carolina Republicans before endorsing Ted Budd.
That's
and to be fair, Ted Budd does have a fairly consistent polling lead now in the last 5 or 6 polls that have come out. But this is a year after the endorsement, and it's mainly because Budd has started campaigning. It's not because Trump came in the last minute and did an endorsement. He did not talk with the state party when he endorsed Ted Budd. He didn't seem to talk with Pennsylvania Republicans when he endorsed Dr. Oz. He didn't talk with Ohio Republicans when he endorsed JD Vance. I mean, it could very well be that he's getting advice from someone, but also I think he's just making generally questionable endorsements in general lately. He's not endorsed in Alabama. I think he's left the door open for Katie Britt or Mike Durant. We really don't know who he's going to endorse there.
He'll send it. I feel pretty confident that he's going to endorse Katie Britt.
we'll see. Actually, Dolan had a, or not Dolan.
Matt
Doyle.
Dolan gets a Trump endorsement.
No, what's that? I actually completely Durant. All the D last names. Durant had actually a fairly substantial gaffe come out lately, where he had made a comment that was somewhat questionable about the Second Amendment. He was talking, it seemed like, about in military terms, like you want to disarm a population. He's like, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if we could disarm the cities? That'd be like an objectively good thing." And that has really irritated a lot of Second Amendment supporters in Alabama, of which there are many. Again, if he endorses there, I think a lot of Alabama Republicans are really, really interested in Katie Britt. And then, in Alaska, he's endorsed Kelly Tshibaka. Now, granted, the state party there does not love Murkowski, but also he didn't wait for anyone else more credible than Kelly Tshibaka to come in. He endorsed her immediately. He endorsed Sarah Palin,
which was a bad move.
Yeah. I mean, again, these candidates could well win. But in terms of the typical Trump effect that we're seeing, they've not been pulling away as you would suspect.
Well, no, I think Trump not having Twitter is a significant barrier to him exerting any real influence.
Yeah. Beyond candidates being able to tout on their own that they're endorsed by Trump, he doesn't have this platform to yell at. He has to go to a spokeswoman and write an angry tweet and then have her post it with official letterhead.
Also, don't forget, he has no Facebook either. That's almost as much as a key as the Twitter is.
He doesn't have a YouTube.
They're hungry for that either.
He doesn't have YouTube, right? Or as well, right?
I think he has YouTube. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, he has his email list, which is not an insignificant thing. But Facebook is the big one for a lot of the more Republican-oriented crowd. There are a lot of older people on Facebook. You may have seen them. You probably have them in your family. I have them in my family who are very active on Facebook, and they talk a lot. That's a platform. It's not a platform for younger people. Probably, most of the people who are listening to this are probably in the younger set who is more active on Twitter or Reddit, something else along those lines, or maybe an internet message board. For a lot of people, Facebook is their main social media platform and the one they consume the most content on and spend the most time on. Not having that is pretty substantial. If you're running a campaign focused on, if you're appealing mostly to older set voters, really.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of that. We won't go into the Elon Musk thing, but that could ironically help a lot of the Republican candidates Trump endorses, if that were to come to pass. I mean, both Dr. Oz and JD Vance, I said this before we came on, I might have said it after. These are the Trump endorsements I expected all along. A TV host and a vaguely conservative author who also has left-wing economic policies, vaguely, or at least gives lip service to them. This is kind of what I expected all along, and I find it strange that it took him an entire presidential term to do this. I think maybe McConnell kept him on more of a leash than we thought. If he endorsed Luther Strange, which I don't think the Trump of today would do. The Trump of today might have endorsed Roy Moore. But I think being out of power has freed him a bit to endorse the candidates he might have been more interested in from the start.
We'll see. I think, we've got a couple weeks until this primary. There's still a lot of time going on, and Vance is still running from behind. He's not led in polls. He's not consistently been in second in polls, let alone in first. Usually he's been, as we mentioned, in third or fourth, along the same lines as a Matt Dolan. Tim can kind of running up the rear in fifth. So we really don't know how this is going to go. North Carolina seems to have solidified kind of in favor. You have obviously Pennsylvania is the wild card here. The Dr. Oz endorsement is so out of left field. And I mentioned, I think last time we were
talking. Did I not call it last time?
Yeah. But, the one thing I will mention for Dr. Oz is the value of a Trump endorsement isn't necessarily in that case in winning the primary. Oz is already doing pretty well to begin with. It's in making him more palatable to Republican voters in general, which is fairly important in Pennsylvania. We really don't know Oz's appeal to the mainstream voter. We really don't know. I mean, it'd be utterly ridiculous to speculate and say, oh, he's going to do better with suburban voters because a lot of suburban voters watch Dr. Oz. That could be very well the thought process here. We really, really, really do not know how this is going to go. We don't know his appeal. So in that case, wrapping him up as saying this guy's a Republican, this guy's a conservative, I like him, that's a bigger deal when you're facing those sort of attacks. The guy's not a conservative, that he's not a Republican. I guess that could apply to Vance as well. We'll see.
Yeah, I don't remember who ran the ad, but somebody made an ad immediately after the Trump endorsement came out, calling Dr. Oz anti-Trump and anti-conservative, which I think is going to fall flat on its face at this point.
I mean, frankly, there's other things that could be attacked that could be potentially used against Oz in a Republican primary that haven't been used. I don't think they will be used. If he gets into the general, I don't think he's in a bad spot.
I don't either. I think he's a good candidate in a general election for Republicans. I think he's much more palatable than Democrats give him credit for.
Probably even more palatable than some of the Lou Barletta last time. He's not a horrible
candidate. Either of Carla Sands or Kathy Barnett, quite honestly.
Yeah, Dr. Oz has that weird Trump-like factor that I think will work well for him in a general election, whether he's up against John Fetterman or somehow Connor Lamb, or even more bizarrely, Kenyatta.
Yeah, we'll go right into Fetterman here in a second, but I will say, Fetterman has specific ethical issues facing him that most candidates will not have to deal with. Dr. Oz does not have that. The worst you can say about him probably is that he's peddled fake medicine.
I was going to say, Dr. Oz doesn't have ethical issues.
Yeah, but he's never, held someone at gunpoint. That's a fairly substantial, difference between the two.
I would be willing to bet Dr. Oz has killed more people with his advice.
We'll see. I mean, it's going to be interesting to look at. I really think it'll be an interesting race if he pulls it out.
I think if I can speak on this here, just, this would be so out of left field for Pennsylvania as a whole when it comes to statewide races, basically.
Yeah, you guys like boring
Pennsylvania for basically the last 100 years. Pennsylvania does not have very flashy statewide races.
No.
We generally run very boring people, or at least one party runs someone very boring who wins, and then the other party who runs the stupid loudmouth loses.
Yeah, you got your Bob Casey's, your Arlen Specters, you got your,
Bob Casey's,
Yeah, I mean, Rick Santorum's the exception here, but he was pretty.
And normal. Even remember, we got to remember where Santorum came from. He was a before the post 2000 election. He won while Al Gore was winning the state by 2. He won by 5.
And he won suburban counties. He was a suburban oriented Republican.
Yes. Rick Santorum was not kind of the loudmouth lunatic that we know today before the post 9/11 stuff. Really, he was not. But
now you got 2 loudmouths.
And then as governor, I mean, even your governors have been fairly, you have your Bob Casey Sr., and then you have, Tom Ridge.
Ed Rendell.
Yeah, Ed Rendell.
Tom Corbett. Tom Wolf.
Yeah.
You guys like Toms.
Tom Ridge, Tom Wolf.
This is not a state that generally pits two, arguably probably controversial and partisan and, kind of, media-oriented candidates. This is not a state that usually has done that in the past. But here we are, where it looks like we're almost certainly going to be between 2 candidates who are media-oriented and bring a lot of potential controversy with them. We're not very used to that here.
And
I, for one, as a New Jerseyan, am very excited by that prospect.
And even weirder, as a throwback, you have candidates that are nominally from 2 different parts of the state. You have Fetterman, who is from the Pittsburgh area. Not that, the city he was in charge of was big. It's not. I think it's a very, very small town.
It was probably about 2,000 people when he first got there.
Yeah, like the unincorporated area I live in, North Carolina, has more people than that. It's not a big area. He's not he won a statewide primary, but he won it in a fractured manner. And you have a Republican who is from the Jersey area, who's from the Philadelphia suburbs.
See, I win either way, because either I get a 3rd senator from New Jersey, or I get a senator who follows me on Twitter. This is a win for me regardless. This is how I win.
Yep, this is how you win.
No, but Pennsylvania has kind of gone so in its Senate race has kind of just gone so off what we're used to happening in this state. It's very weird. To have, like I said, this mediatization of a statewide race in Pennsylvania is very weird to have happen. It is not normal at all.
So,
And Fetterman versus Oz would really be that for the first time really ever in Pennsylvania, where we would have candidates who would bring a lot of media attention.
yes.
Pat Toomey didn't do that, and Katie McGinty didn't do that in 2016. People focused on Pennsylvania because of the presidential race, not necessarily because of who the two Senate candidates were. Compared to Fetterman versus Oz, Toomey versus McGinty, it was like two wet blankets laying up against each other. The change in personality for what is going to be a competitive Senate race is drastic. It is drastic, and we have never seen something like it before.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I've asked you this since the endorsement came out. How much do you think a Trump endorsement is going to matter in Pennsylvania? It matters a lot in Ohio, but Trump has, I would imagine, less influence.
Like he's upset some people, both on the normal right and on the far right. There are some people, if you go into the real lunatic PA groups, some of those free PA groups that you've seen that do not have a lot of people. Let me say that very carefully right now. They don't have necessarily a whole lot of people, but they do have certain people in there. And, these are not also necessarily people who are very happy with Trump endorsing, Dr. Oz. And these are also people who, the circles I hang out with, who are, not, there are some who are not unhappy with this, some people who are okay with the endorsement. And then there are others who are very upset with the endorsement, maybe because they supported Dave McCormick or, Carlos Sands. These are upset people. Like I said earlier, this is a risk from Donald Trump. This is a risk from an individual in a state where if there is a legit primary in 2024, he's going to need support from. Mainly because if a presidential primary does happen in 2024, there's rumors that Pennsylvania is going to bump its primary up. There's some pretty heavy rumors about that in 2024, actually, that Pennsylvania will bump its primary up in the calendar if both parties have competitive primaries. Mm-hmm. So, this is a state where he has to do well in. His endorsement isn't word here, in part because of Pennsylvania's geographic voting. That's a key indicator. Remember, he endorsed Lou Barletta right from the start in that 2018 Senate race before the primary even happened. And don't forget, Barletta still only got about 63% of the vote because a state rep from a different part of the state got a lot of local votes, especially from the western and southwestern parts of the state. He did a lot better and he got about 37% of the vote against Barletta in that 1v1 race. Pennsylvania is a weird state still, in which the geographic voting that has been gone from many states still very much exists in Pennsylvania. And this is where Dave McCormick does have a clear advantage over Dr. Oz. Oz is stuck in with a couple, Kathy Barnett's from Montgomery County, a couple of other the lower level candidates are from, the pencil, Jeff Bartos is from Montgomery County, and he's not necessarily polling at a, at a small amount, and he's still polling about 7 to 8% of the votes. That's not a small amount for someone who's coming from one of the more populated part of the states. Dave McCormick will have the entire western area to himself. He has that entire area to himself. He's the only candidate from western Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And, Carlos Sands is the only candidate from central Pennsylvania. And, I don't think she'll win necessarily a whole lot of those counties. There's rumors she might win one of Cumberland or Dauphin, her home area there in the capital region. Mm-hmm. But that's, kind of still a play in effect there that Oz does not have the geographic advantage here, and which that is key in Pennsylvania, because what happens in Pennsylvania for statewide and congressional races and even local races that take up more than one county is that a candidate's home county is placed on the ballot next to that candidate's name. It's something that not a lot of states do anymore, but a candidate's home county is placed on the name. And that's why you've seen in a lot of areas, a lot of these weird maps in Pennsylvania before an open primaries. I'm sure Eric, which I think he's doing right now, I'm guessing is probably going to pull up our map from the auditor's primary.
That's what I'm looking for.
Auditor's primary in 2020. where obviously there wasn't any necessarily clear favor, but the party was clearly favoring actually Connor Lamb's uncle, Michael Lamb, who was the Allegheny County commissioner, who was he was something. He was an Allegheny County commissioner, I believe, or maybe the Allegheny County auditor. He had a position. I forget what exactly his position was now, but the party leadership was pretty clearly favoring him. But because of the changing, direction of the Democratic primary electorate, especially in COVID, where primary turnout was all over the place and the primary itself was already done, Nina Ahmad, who was considerably a weaker candidate considering who Republicans had put up, in a more moderate candidate, and Tim DeFore was able to break through in a couple of key counties out in the Southeast, and Eric just left. Okay. That's very interesting. We're going to see, but we're going to keep talking here while he comes back. He'll be back shortly, I'm sure. There he is.
He's back.
I moved the swipe accidentally with my finger in it. I moved the tab away.
Yeah.
But by the way, since we mentioned Connor Lamb, can we just say it's amazing how much his campaign has floundered?
Yeah, it's pretty surprising. I'm never one to not admit when he's wrong, and I've been very wrong on this.
Yeah,
I said for months that I thought Lamb would be someone who would eventually break out past Fetterman. He was just going to have probably more money, more establishment backing. He was someone who, the DCC, I thought was going was going to be ready and able to do that. That just hasn't necessarily happened.
No,
and I'm gonna screen share it here.
I think Schumer is a little hesitant to endorse anyone at this point, given Cal Cunningham, Sarah Gideon.
Yeah, so I don't know. Let me see if I can zoom in here on this a little bit. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. I'm having a hard time. The image, I couldn't find a really good image of high quality. There you go. You're zooming it in a little bit. Look at this nonsense. Look at it.
Every candidate that was running in this race won at least a county.
Yes. 7 candidates.
Stay weird. Stay weird, PA.
7 candidates. 1 counties.
And it should be said that part of Lamb's issues were boosted by the fact of State Rep Scott Conklin, who's from the Penn State Center County area. As you can see by kind of the 3 very big purple counties. These are usually counties that would probably more favor the Western candidate like Lamb was. And Center County is not a small county for Democratic primary voters. These aren't necessarily, but it wouldn't have won him, but it was still about 6 to 7% of the primary vote that Conklin had in these primaries that if he wasn't in the race, probably would have gone to Michael Lamb. But still, definitely kind of certainly like a crazy thing to look at it right there.
Stay weird, PA.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so.
This is a factor when you have a state with regional voting and a lot of counties, and this habit of still, of the county line system, which is just such an unusual, holdover that most other states don't have. I don't think a single other state, aside from maybe New Jersey with the county line system, has something even similar to what Pennsylvania has.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the weirder topics of Pennsylvania voting. In primaries, it's mattered before. And this is kind of why we all kind of thought the Senate primary is going to be really weird going into it, because obviously in kind of the last hurrah, it almost seems like if parts of the Western Democrats outside of the Pittsburgh area, admittedly these are both Allegheny Center Democrats, but kind of the last hurrah that the 2 key candidates are those who were from the western part of the state. As outside of the Allegheny County, the Democratic voter base there has lessened substantially, as areas like Erie and Beaver County and Westmoreland, Washington, and Greene counties have all trended pretty, at least decently to significantly to the right. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be very fascinating to see how these counties come in on election night. And that's why I don't think that the Trump endorsement is going to be the be all end all in this race. And you've seen some very interesting endorsements from congressional leaders as well. Obviously, you have Reschenflaller and Smucker endorsing Oz, but you have Dan Muser, who's from that northeastern part of the state, and G.T. Thompson, who's from the big rural district, endorsing McCormick, and there's some rumors. This isn't confirmed at all from me by anyone, but there are some rumors that Brian Fitzpatrick may insert himself into the race and likely and potentially endorse David McCormick potentially in this race. So that would certainly be interesting as well. But it seems like congressmen are willing to divide up their lines. Muser is a big one. He came in post-Trump, so this is a guy who ran very much on supporting the president when he first came into Congress in 2018. So that is kind of significant a little bit that he decided to look past the Trump endorsement and endorsed McCormick after the fact. Trump had already endorsed Oz. So it should be said that unlike Ohio, where I do think, especially in Eastern Ohio, where I would say that there were probably a lot of probably some undecided voters there, some newer Republican voters who are unassigned in this race, who will go and probably now vote for J.D. Vance. I still don't think it's the be-all, end-all between him and Dr. Oz and McCormick and the other candidates in Pennsylvania. I still think there's definitely a race to be there with about a month to go until that primary.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked a lot about the Republican side of Pennsylvania. Let's go ahead and talk about the Democratic side, because the Democratic side is a lot less interesting, but it's also very interesting in its own right. So we've been following, of course, the last few months. There's only 3 major Democratic candidates running in Pennsylvania. You have John Fetterman, who's the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. You have Conor Lamb, who is a congressman from the Pittsburgh area. He represented a red seat initially that became a blue seat, and now under the new map is a very, very Democratic seat, or not very, very. It's more Democratic. So he would have had a very safe time winning re-election in this district in all likelihood. Instead, he chose to run for Senate, and he's acquired a number of substantial party endorsements. In fact, it's safe to say the vast majority of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party is behind Conor Lamb, at least from an organizational perspective. The problem is that voters do not appear to be behind Conor Lamb, as he has trailed Fetterman in every poll by double-digit margins. The polling average right now, according to Real Clear Politics, is Fetterman's at about 31% of the vote, and then Lamb is at about 13% of the vote, with Malcolm Kenyatta, who is a state senator, I believe, state representative, in third with about 5%. Fetterman is the more progressive candidate of the bunch. He's been supported by a bunch of progressives. Kenyatta is also progressive. Difference here, the main thing, though, with Fetterman is that there are serious concerns among Pennsylvania Democrats that Fetterman is not ready or not a good candidate to run statewide. We've mentioned, of course, the incident involving pulling a gun on an unarmed black jogger. Conor Lamb has been using this quite a lot. But additionally, Fetterman has not actually won a statewide race. He won a primary, but because Pennsylvania has a weird system where the lieutenant governor has a separate primary that runs on a joint ticket with the governor, he really hasn't actually competed on his own statewide. This is his first major race. And so, we're seeing a lot of Pennsylvania Democrats are lining up behind Conor Lamb, but it's just not translating into polling momentum. What are you seeing from this, Joe? Or is my assessment here correct, or am I a little bit off? And what do you think about, what do you think about the prospects of this going forward? Obviously, we talked a little bit about the potential of the Oz-Fetterman race, but it would be certainly we have this, I think it leans Republican right now on elections day. I can't imagine that would change in the event of an Oz-Fetterman race, right?
Yeah, I can't say it will at this point. I think you have to look at the signs. And you look at the Philadelphia Democratic Party endorsing Conor Lamb, trying to get the black vote out for Conor Lamb in that part of the area, where that's very key, incredibly key to a Democratic primary. Mm-hmm. Part of that was to try and force Malcolm Kenyatta out of the race. He has all but refused to do so. He himself is someone who was not happy with certain aspects of the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. Don't think that Republicans are the only party in Pennsylvania who have issues right now, which I will not deny. Republicans in Pennsylvania have had their issues for a while now. That's always the case. But Democrats in Pennsylvania have their infighting as well. And Kenyatta is kind of out there trying to send his own message, which in turn, some people believe because of, that Lamb has almost run more towards the east than his own base and in the west currently, that Lamb, kind of probably wanted Kenyatta to drop out to likely gain those voters. That's not happening. Well, at this point, we continue to be unable to see polling narrow. Now, primaries can change very, very quickly. We still have about a month left to go until Pennsylvania decides who in their primary. You remember, polling can change very, very quickly in primaries. Stuff can change rapidly, but it still hasn't happened right now in Pennsylvania, and time is running out for Connor Lamb in that Democratic primary. It is running out. Him going on the attack against Fetterman in ads, in TV ads, mind you. It's not just online ads. These are ads that are going on televisions. This is not something that we've necessarily seen from Democrats in the Trump era, even in primaries. They've usually tried to keep their primaries quiet. They've also usually tried to endorse candidates in races. Recently, since Chuck Schumer's taken over, obviously kind of the effects that it had in both 2020 and 2018 have seemingly kind of forced them to take a step back in the 2022 cycle for a good chunk of these races. But this is a primary that is going to get nasty in the last month. This is going to get ugly. Lamb is getting desperate. He is going to dig deep. He is going to dig into that opposition file that a lot of people have on Fetterman. He is going to try very, very hard here to make this race. And if it is Fetterman who pulls it out, then that will not make it an easy general election for him. There will be quite a lot of there will be opposition against, and there will be attacks out there for Republicans, whether that's Mehmet Oz or David McCormick, that will get to use it against him.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I tend to agree with everything Joe said. I've heard a lot about the opposition research on Fetterman. I haven't seen any of it. All I've seen is him holding a unarmed black jogger at gunpoint. I am a little surprised that attack from Lamb has not penetrated at all. Because Lamb's been pretty deliberate and pretty on message with that. He hasn't let a single day go by, I don't think, where that message is not being pumped out. So the fact that it hasn't penetrated with Democratic voters yet makes me wonder if it's ever going to. And granted, he doesn't have a lot of money. But regardless, and I don't think Kenyatta dropping out would help him all that much. If that poll that we saw, I think yesterday, is accurate, and Kenyatta's only polling at 4%, I don't see him dropping out making up much of a difference when the gap is 41 to 17.
Kenyatta's value mostly comes from his endorsements, because he has a very large number of endorsements from Philadelphia. It's the one area where he's doing really strong. You can actually go to Wikipedia and find a list of these endorsements. Like, for comparison here, he's got a couple of House representatives, none of them from Pennsylvania, of course. He's got state legislatures from Pennsylvania. He's got some local officials from Philadelphia, some unions, including the AFT, SEIU, the Working Families Party, for whatever's that worth. Whereas Fetterman's basically just got like the postal workers, food workers local, marijuana reform, and then his wife, which is not really worth noting on Wikipedia. For some reason, Wikipedia lists his wife is endorsing him. Really doesn't make a lot of sense why that would be there. This kind of seems like a given, but like basically to put it that
Andy
way,
Biggs's family is against him, so
yeah. But to put it this way, like Fetterman has very few endorsements from like actually anyone. He has very few, even from labor, from party groups, from elected officials. Kenyatta has those. And those could be valuable in theory. Granted, we've seen Lamb get a lot of endorsements, and they've had basically no value whatsoever in increasing his stock. Whatever week comes out, Lamb brings out a new party endorsement or a new labor endorsement. It's not moved the needle. Maybe the logic of their campaign is that if they could just get one more, they could just get all of the labor endorsements behind them, and then they do a lot better. Yeah, I don't know. It seems like he's kind of in a rut where he's going to need to be going a lot more negative and a lot quicker, and doing that runs the risk of delivering a gigantic oppo file that Republicans would be more than happy to capitalize on in November. Because if you got a candidate like Oz, who was untested in the suburbs, you got a lot of polls indicating suburban voters are more willing to, suburban men in particular, are potentially a group to swing a little bit back towards the Republicans. Having that incident right there, that's the sort of thing suburban voters tend to not like. In theory, could be in practice. I really don't know. Maybe Philadelphia suburban voters love that sort of thing. That's exactly what they're wanting from the representatives
Well, the fact that it hasn't hurt him yet
in the
does
primary.
in the primary does make me go, just a little bit. I mean, I would have expected it to hurt him.
I mean, to be fair, you had the Roy Moore thing. The Roy Moore stuff came out, and he still won that primary fairly handily. Sometimes party just kind of keys in on a candidate, and whatever you throw at them, nothing works. And then they get to the general and they lose.
Did Roy Moore's stuff come out during the primary? I thought it came out a little bit after.
It came up during the primary, I believe. Let me exactly look at the exact details, but I'm almost certain if it didn't come off in the actual primary, it came up in the runoff.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, is Fetterman a super strong general election candidate? I don't know. As we've all kind of harped on, he's largely untested. Do I think Connor Lamb is a strong general election candidate? No. Theoretically, he seems to have everything you would want in a general election candidate in Pennsylvania. By that, I mean he's boring. But I think he's been too boring, even for PA. He can't break through. So I don't think he'd be a great candidate. And I don't have an opinion at all on Kenyatta. So the big Oppo file is a risk, but it doesn't seem like that big a risk when compared to the practical problems that Lamb and Kenyatta are having. And Dr. Oz, I got nothing.
Yeah,
that's just funny.
But we'll have more to talk about next week. I think we've kind of covered most of what we could do with these races. We'll see how kind of the polling shifts and whatnot. But thank you guys for watching. Really appreciate your support. If you like what we're doing, like, retweet, share, wherever you're watching this on. We really appreciate your support. You can find me on Twitter at DECunningham2. You can find us on Twitter at elections_daily and elections-daily.com. We have articles, tools, all sorts of stuff, podcasts. If you're not subscribed to us on podcast platforms, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, pretty much most of the major podcast platforms, we're on them. But yeah, where can we guys find you on Twitter? And then we'll go ahead and close it off.
Yeah, you can find me at Joseph Szymanski. That's JOSEPHSZYMANSKI, all one word. Thanks for listening to me, guys.
Dylan W. Brown 1. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, thank you guys again. We'll see you next week. We'll be back on our usual Thursday schedule next week, so it'll be a little bit less than a week from now. But, yeah, thank you guys for watching, and see you next time.